Today is the 13th of August. The world is changing as we know it. The post Second World War order is for sure changing, and everything around us is not going to be the same even a year from now. I have with me my dear friend and colleague, a founder of this channel that you have supported so much, and we really appreciate that, Vijay Prashad, who today is in Santiago, Chile. He is in a different place every time I speak to him. So if you like what we do, please hit the like and subscribe button. We'll deliver the excellent commentary that we do on this channel twice a week in your mailbox, and become a paid subscriber. Go to Substack for about $5 a month. We'll deliver that to you. Vijay, please go ahead and tell our audience, tell the world how the world is changing.
Well, Zulfiqar, the temptation is to talk about the Iran conflict, the conflict that's imposed on Iran. But I actually want to go to the Americas for a few minutes, just to show how related these things are. As people might know, there are now 11 out of 20 of the countries in Latin America, 11 out of 20 that have far right wing governments. That's pretty considerable. Most recently, just before the terrible earthquake in Colombia, the Colombian people elected by a very slim margin, less than 1%, Abelardo de la Espriella to be their president. De la Espriella is a billionaire, is a man of the very far right. He joins people like Daniel Noboa, like Santiago Pena, like Rodrigo Paz, like Javier Milei, Jose Antonio Cast of Chile, where I am, Laura Fernandez of Costa Rica. I mean, there's a long list of people of the far right that are in power in Latin America. And why I'm bringing this up is a little known thing has been happening in Latin America. People who pay attention to the work of transition protocol might not know about what's happening. What's happening is in June of last year, June 2025, the Argentinian ambassador to Israel, Rabbi Shimon Axel Wanish, announced something called the Isaac Accords. Now, people may know about the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords was a policy by Donald Trump's son in law, Jared Kushner, to rope in various Arab countries into an alliance with Israel. This included, of course, Morocco, it included various countries in the Gulf Arab states, and so on. The Abraham Accords was a way to yoke these Arab countries with Israel. Well, June 2025, we get Abraham and then Isaac, the Isaac Accords, which initially the signatory was just Argentina and Israel. They signed up into this Isaac Accord to have their relationship be closer. And it was formally established, the Isaac Accords, in April 2026 in Jerusalem. Now, in May of 2026, the Argentinian government had a conference in Buenos Aires, bringing together officials from Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Paraguay, Uruguay, Venezuela. I mean, almost everybody, officials from almost everybody, was at this conference in Buenos Aires on the Isaac Accords. And they effectively signed a statement about its expansion. Now, with far right wing governments, Rodrigo Paz in Bolivia, De La Espriella in Colombia, with the pressure campaign on Venezuela, these countries have begun diplomatic relations with Israel. Venezuela only consular relations, but it's starting. Now, this is very, very important for the global picture and for what's happening in the Gulf region. Because what Israel has been doing, not only in Latin America, but on the African continent as well, is it's been on an enormous project of normalization to get normal relations done with countries around the world, to build up a phalanx against the isolation that Israel had begun to feel because of the genocide, which is continuing against the Palestinians. That genocide hasn't ended. So they've been on a major mission to link up with these far right wing governments around the world to create various forms of relations that will prevent their isolation. And this has been very clever. So, despite what's happening in the Middle East, and by the way, it's not so bad for Israel, because Colombia, this new government de la Espriella, during the time of the earthquake in Colombia, hundreds of people dead, the president signs a document ratifying Israel's right to the extended Golan Heights. I mean, what does Colombia have to do with the Golan Heights? But it establishes that it agrees with Israel's seizure of the Golan Heights. This is around the same time that Syria's new government, which has basically ceded its own territory to Israel as a thank you present for allowing it to overthrow Bashar al Assad, Syria's new president, Ahmad Sharar, has been on a tear, getting justice for the people of Syria against officials from the Assad government, and they've been given death sentences. This cleanup has been happening really with Israel smiling on the side, because the Ahmad Sharar government is basically a pro-Israel government. So, when you had the Mecca agreement, and now coming back to the Iran region, when you had the Mecca agreement, which is very significant, it brings together Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. Now, firstly, I don't want to exaggerate the Mecca agreement, because it's important to recognize that Saudi Arabia and Pakistan already had a defense agreement, which was basically the outlines of the Mecca agreement. This was in 2025. They already had an agreement. It's Turkey that, in a sense, joins their agreement. Turkey wanted Egypt as well in the agreement. Saudi Arabia not keen on Egypt. Egypt also entangled with its own bilateral relation with Israel. That would have complicated this whole thing. Egypt has to really think about that relation with Israel. So, this new formation, or at least extended formation, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia adding in Turkey, this new formation is happening at the same time as Israel is creating all kinds of linkages of its own. We need to see this as a kind of parallel development, because, and here's why I wanted to start in South America, not because I'm just here, because when the Mecca agreement was announced, I was looking to see how New Delhi would react. And very interesting, New Delhi's statement was, look, this agreement has nothing to do with India. It has nothing to do with India. In other words, it's not really a defense pact. It's not really like NATO's Article 5 defense pact. In NATO's Article 5 defense pact, if any country in the NATO alliance is attacked, all the other countries are immediately called upon for the defense of that country. It's an automatic trigger. In the Mecca agreement, if you read it carefully, only when a country invites the others within the agreement do they come to the aid of that country. It's not an automatic trigger. In other words, if India and Pakistan go into a conflict, there is no automatic need for Saudi Arabia and Turkey to enter the conflict. They will only be called upon by Pakistan, if need be, to enter the conflict. So it's not really parallel of NATO. It's a much lesser form of agreement. So the Indian government, reading this, not the final agreement, but press statements on the agreement, said that, look, this is not against India. This is a agreement of security for these countries. And India, therefore, wants to squelch as fake news rumors that it's entering into a military arrangement with Israel. You see, while Israel is creating these Abraham Accords and Isaac Accords, I just want to underline there is no parallel happening in West Asia, which might include something like, let's say, India or one or two other countries. This is not a camp lineup. And the reason I'm saying this is this has got ramifications for Iran. The Iranians also reacted to the Mecca agreement saying this is not against Iran. And in fact, we now know quite clearly, almost fully confirmed, that Iran was informed of the Mecca agreement prior to its signing. This is already pretty much confirmed that this is not was not a surprise to Tehran. Tehran downplayed press statements about it for good reason, because the press started to call this the Islamic NATO and so on, using the term NATO. Iran quickly came in and says it's not a NATO, and they are right. From all accounts, this is not an Article 5 agreement. This is merely three countries that have come together and said we need to have some security guarantees. Now, here's the question: why do these countries need security guarantees, and why have they proffered a hand to Egypt? You see, this is not a blow to Iran. It is not a blow to India. This doesn't impact them. The Indian External Affairs Ministry is correct. This is not an anti India pact. I think they read this very well. I also think the Iranians have read this very well. This is not an anti Iran pact. What this what these three countries have said is that their defense is no longer guaranteed by the United States. That the United States is not capable of providing a nuclear umbrella for Saudi Arabia, for instance. The United States is not capable of providing protection for Pakistan and has not been for a very long time. In 1971, the US came to, in a sense, the aid of Pakistan during the war that produced Bangladesh. The US 7th Fleet was in operation in the Indian Ocean, ready to go up to defend Pakistani troops. They weren't capable of it, but they tried. But for many years, the United States has not provided any kind of umbrella for Pakistan. In fact, treated Pakistan very poorly. And with Turkey, Turkey has already accused the US of attempting to foment a coup, you'll remember, 10 years ago. So they have had a mixed relationship with NATO and the US. So the formation of the Mecca Agreement is nothing like the Isaac Accords being signed all over Latin America. It's nothing like the Abraham Accords, which are trying to yoke countries like Morocco to Israel. This Mecca Agreement is an indication again of the lack of confidence that countries such as Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, all long standing allies of the United States, allies of the US from the 1940s. These are members of NATO. Pakistan was a founding member of CENTO, Central Treaty Organization, of SEATO, of the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. Saudi Arabia has been an anchor for US defense agreements in that region. These three countries, with in a sense 80 years of reliance upon the United States, are now turning around and saying we have no confidence in the US providing us with security. Therefore, we have turned to each other for mutual security, not against Iran, not against India, but against unnamed adversaries that the United States previously used to protect them from. That's my sense is we cannot miss what's happening in Latin America. It's very important. The Isaac Accords. We cannot miss what's happening in the Arab world, namely the Abraham Accords. We just can't ignore these things. And then what Israel is doing in Africa. We can't ignore what's happening. But what has happened with the Mecca Agreement has nothing to do with that directly. It is merely three old, long standing US allies which are saying we no longer have confidence in the United States to provide us security. We need to provide a regional security arrangement. And my feeling is, despite press reports which say that Egypt is next in line to join and so on, I believe that they will proffer an olive branch to Iran, and that we will see the Iranians have some sort of observer relationship in this Mecca agreement. Otherwise, this agreement makes no sense.
Vijay, I completely agree with everything that you said. And I rely upon the sources to which I turn every day, sources that are deeply embedded in what is going on and have been reliable as of the time since we started talking about this on this channel. And that is their reporting uh, to a letter, to the T. This is an agreement that has been just actually in the last 24 hours endorsed by the king. Very rare right now in Saudi Arabia. Father of Crown Prince MBS, saying that it's a great agreement, blah blah blah, blessings, so forth. So it is an important agreement for exactly the same reason that you just outlined. Exactly the same reason. These countries, which used to be stalwarts of the United States post World War II, are now saying, well, we have seen what you did with Iran. We have seen that you cannot defend anybody other than Israel. So we need to defend ourselves. And it is a step in that direction. And yes, I can confirm to our listeners, to our audience, that a proffer has been made to Iran, has been made to Iran. Pakistan and Iran have come closer together in the last 2 or 3 months than they have been for the last 50 years. In fact, on this anniversary of independence happening in a couple of days on the 14th of August, the speaker has been invited, speaker of Iranian parliament, Majlis, has been invited to attend. Foreign Minister Arachi has been invited. They are not going to attend on the 14th. They are going to come soon thereafter because their real purpose is to have extended talks with civilian and military leadership. Now, why would they want to have talks with military leadership? Because it is going to be a deep military type alliance as well. We have reported this on this channel, not reported elsewhere, that with the help of China, with the support of China, with the active involvement of China, Pakistan has been a conduit to Iran for all kinds of weaponry, advanced weaponry, all kinds of technology, especially the technology that is embedded in the Beidou system, which has provided Iran the capability of precisely targeting anything they want, including Trump, forcing him to to extricate himself by hiding in a food cart of 747 and leaving the rest of his delegation to a potential attack. This is how much he cares about people close to him. Forget about caring for people like you and I. So the world is changing, as I began to introduce, in the introduction that I made, and it is going to be a long-lasting change, Vijay. And no better person than you to explain further how this will impact everybody, literally everybody, because if the United States is expelled, forced out of the region, which is happening as we speak. As we speak, this war is going to come to an end with the United States disgraced, humiliated, and forced to exit, regardless of the spend. And we can boldly say that on this channel because we are not supported by corporate media. We don't take money from anybody. We report things as we know so that our readers are informed, our listeners are informed, and we bring people like yourself, in my opinion, giants, today's intellectual giants, to bring truth to the people who have kindly supported us. So when the United States is humiliated out of the region, which hopefully is going to be sooner rather than later, how do you think the rest of the region is going to react to that?
Well, this is very interesting because I mean, there's a chessboard quality to the conversation. You know, when you start getting into it, I mean, the very fact that Turkey's leadership called Egypt a natural partner to join this Mecca agreement, that must have sent a little bit of worry into the US State Department and the National Security State because they rely on Egypt as a pillar. More plausible than Egypt being able to enter into this agreement, are the Gulf Arab states. The ones that are now saying that the US military bases might need to disband. I'm talking now about Qatar, about Kuwait. Maybe perhaps it's very likely that Bahrain will also enter into this. Bahrain basically is an appendage of Saudi Arabia, and if Saudi Arabia think it's a good idea, I think Bahrain will walk in, and so you have three Gulf Arab states that likely will enter this. I'm actually of the view that we shouldn't discount the fact that something like a country like Azerbaijan might come in. Very close links to Turkey, has defense agreements with Pakistan and so on. So these countries could enter into this Mecca agreement, even as observers. I don't know what the structure will be when a secretariat is built and so on, because there's a whole bureaucracy that is going to follow. The agreement is one thing, and then you have to structure it and see how it works. There'll be military liaisons. Where will it be located? All of that is yet to be finalized and put into place. But I think these are likely candidates to be members. The interesting development will be Jordan and Egypt. Jordan has very close military relationship with Pakistan. I mean, this is the thing that we haven't really, talked much about publicly, which is that Pakistan has long-standing military relationships with a number of Arab countries. I mean, it's not always a glorious relationship, Zulfiqar, because during Black September, at the time, I think Brigadier, he was not a general yet, Brigadier Ziaul Haq had
Yes.
Pakistani troops attack the Palestinians. It's not always a glorious heritage, but even that example shows you the depth of connection between the monarchy's military in Jordan and Pakistani forces goes back at least to the 1960s. Very important linkages, even with Gamal Abdul Nasser's military. They had linkages with the Pakistani training and so on, because we mustn't forget that these were all forces trained by the British. They had a kind of inbuilt interoperability. They could easily go in and out of each other's brigade commands and so on. So there's a lot of old military attachments between Jordan and Pakistan. Now, why I'm raising all this is that there is a there is a slight anxiety in countries like Jordan and in Egypt. If the world can stand by and watch the overthrow of the government in Syria, so that a pro-Israeli government comes to power, and that the world stands by as Israel sort of eats into Syrian land. Israel makes comments such as, actually greater Israel goes all the way out to the Euphrates River in Iraq. I mean, what does that mean for Jordan? What does it mean for the monarchy in Jordan? There must be some anxiety in Amman, among some people there. It's a majority Palestinian population in Jordan. The Israelis are making these noises saying that, in fact, greater Israel goes to the Euphrates. The United States not really a reliable defender of anybody's land in the region. What would the Jordanians be thinking? Are they so completely linked to their 1994 defense pact with Israel, their agreement with Israel, that they are not going to, entertain again even some lesser status in the Mecca agreement, which would put pressure on Israel? I mean, that's the bottom line: is if this Mecca agreement comes into force, does this pressure Israel? It's not an anti-Iran agreement. It's not even currently an anti-Israel agreement. I mean, for God's sake, we're talking about Saudi Arabia and Turkey here. They may have some verbal anti-Israeli comments here and there, or pro-Palestinian comments, but their actions are quite different than that. But nonetheless, despite not being anti-Iranian or anti-Israeli on the face of it, if Jordan, if Egypt, if these countries, Algeria, start to get involved, you got a really different game on your hand in West Asia. You've got countries that are saying we can't rely on the United States. In fact, we don't want them around. We want to build our own security arrangement. And if they are building their own security arrangement and the US is not welcome in the region, that leaves Israel quite exposed, and that should be a worry as well in Tel Aviv. I mean, things are changing in such a way that when they thought that this attack in February of this year would overthrow the government in Iran, in fact the opposite has happened. United States seems to be getting isolated, not just militarily and diplomatically, but also their ability to shape policy for Israel might decrease, and therefore Israel will be isolated at the end. It's really backfired for them. This illegal war that they prosecuted on Iran has genuinely backfired for the United States. This must be, I mean, if I was in a research institute in Russia, in China, I would be studying this very closely. Studying how it was possible for the Iranians to conduct this form of jiu-jitsu against the United States, and in a way, why Russia was not able to do this to the Europeans. Why Russia is still sitting in a military stalemate, with no real diplomatic jiu-jitsu against the Europeans, whereas here it seems Iran has pulled it off.
Well, I would like to offer certain insights based upon what it is that I see, what it is that I hear, and that is that the center of gravity for these three countries coming together is Islamabad. I mean, most people don't know about this, but people who are keen observers of what Pakistan has been doing military in terms of military relationships, military power projection, military alliances, and all of that, they will quickly understand what it is that I'm talking about. Islamabad has been very actively involved in fostering these relationships that have now emerged as as a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, which was announced maybe a year ago, and that has since blossomed, I would say, into this Mecca agreement. Pakistan has been having very active relationships with Azerbaijan, with Somalia recently announced in excess of $2 billion in terms of value, and with the assistance and backing of China, discreetly with Iran. In fact, if Pakistan had not extended extraordinary assistance to Iran, Iran may not have been able to pull off what everybody is recognizing as a masterclass of military planning, military execution, military dominance over a foe that is 100 times larger. So that is the center of gravity. Now, having said that, Pakistan recently signed an extension of an agreement, an enlargement of the agreement with Kuwait. You may have heard about this. Pakistan is in talks with Qatar. Pakistan is in talks with other regional countries. So the view from Islamabad is this: that in the years to come, a new bloc is going to be created. I mean, not that far distant future, maybe 12 months from now, maybe 18 months from now. That will be a very strong mutual defense agreement between all of these countries, and it'll be facing down only one foe, and that is Israel. So, where does that leave Israel?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean, that the if you apply the basics of game theory to this, Israel's isolation is pretty much guaranteed, and that's perhaps why Israel is on the rampage to build these relationships with right wing governments in Latin America and Africa and so on, to try to create some kind of international leverage on behalf of Israel. It's going to be difficult, I will say, that even if you have a set of alliances in Latin America, how is that going to help you in your neighborhood? You need to have allies in your neighborhood. Cuba, for instance, is isolated in its neighborhood. It has very few allies left, maybe Brazil to some extent, Mexico, and so on. But most of Latin America, far right wing governments turning against Cuba. That allows the US to turn up the screws against Cuba. Since January, the oil blockade has been severe. Can Israel anticipate something like that, in the near future? We shall see. I mean, we shall see. It will certainly be isolated. There is no other option. I mean, Morocco is not a stable ally. Morocco has its own problems. The Western Sahara issue, that's actually driving it closer and closer to Israel. And Morocco is creating problems in the Sahel region of Africa, trying to divide Mali from Burkina Faso and so on. Trying to divide these states that are exercising sovereignty. So we shall see, how this isolation practice goes. But meanwhile, I mean, I do agree with you that Islam plays a role here. That's what, in a sense, is being utilized as a kind of emotional bridge. But I would also caution that, neither is this what some people are calling a Sunni alliance, because that assumes that the adversary is largely Shiite Iran. That's a false, a description of this as a Sunni alliance. It's also not fully only an Islamic alliance. It is, of course, that is, of course, a very important component of what emotionally and culturally brings these countries together, certainly. But that won't be the foundation of the alliance. You already have the Organization of Islamic Countries, the OIC. They already operate on the world stage. This is not a repeat of that. Why would these countries need a repeat of that? This is a regional security bloc, and that has to be emphasized. The security, regional security, is what is on the cards today. As the global policeman, as it were, the United States retreats from its job, as the police disappears, community policing comes in. I mean, that's what's really happening, is that Saudi Arabia is saying that, look, we can't rely on the Fifth Fleet. They're not coming. They're not going to defend us. We can't rely on the bases in Qatar and so on to defend us. The US has shown that it's incapable of defense. Whoever the adversary is, whomsoever the adversary is, doesn't matter. What I'm also looking at is, and nobody has been talking about them, is where will Iraq fall in this? Because Iraq currently has very close ties with Iran and has been relatively silent during this entire conflict. Relatively silent. Yes, Saudi Arabia did attack, what they called an Iranian proxy on Iraqi soil. Iraq did not respond. Iraq didn't say anything about it. Yeah, that was quite a surprise to see that. So Iraq is not part of this. So this is not entirely, you can't call it a Sunni alliance. You can't call it an Islamic alliance. It's a Mecca agreement, but it is true that Islam is a kind of cultural glue, because it was important that the people, that the principles that came to Mecca for this agreement went and prayed together. That's true, and it's important. Yeah, the Turkish, the Pakistanis and the Saudis went to pray together. That kind of seals the bond in a way. It is certainly a cultural, emotional part of the unity, but that's not the platform of the unity. It is a regional security alliance. And I think this is something very important as a lesson to countries like Japan, South Korea, and so on. When they rely so heavily on the United States for their security against those whom they see as their adversaries, whether it's North Korea or China or Russia or whatever. Yeah, it doesn't matter who they see as the adversaries. They entirely rely on the United States. Yeah, their land is filled with US bases, 100 or so US bases in Northeast Asia. I mean, again, in Tokyo, in Seoul, you're watching what's happening with Iran, and you're thinking, this is a disaster. Perhaps Japan, South Korea, these countries need to come together and start talking to the North Koreans, start creating a regional security arrangement, where they have mutual early warning, mutual agreement not to go nuclear, and so on. I mean, this must be crossing their minds. There must be a discussion happening in Vietnam, in Philippines, and so on, to think about a Southeast Asian regional cooperation, with Indonesia and so on. These things must be happening for them as they watch the absolute disaster of reliance upon the United States to provide the security umbrella. They must be thinking we need. So that's why I say the emphasis here should be on the fact that this is a regional security alliance, because it provides a kind of model. It is modular. It provides a model for people in Northwest Asia that won't be based on an Islamic unity, or in Southeast Asia, largest Muslim country in the world is Indonesia, but they will have to seek, regional security with Philippines, with Vietnam, and so on. Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. That the regional security component of this, absent the United States, I think will be the example that will be exemplary for these countries.
Well, thank you for that explanation, Vijay. And just to explain my point of view, I was talking about Islamabad, not Islam.
Ah, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, but I'm also reacting to the use of the term Sunni alliance,
Yes, yes, yes.
which has been thrown out, and I think that's a little irresponsible, because that sort of again plays into a rather meaningless, idea that there's a Shia Sunni dispute at play here. There really isn't. I mean, the fact that Pakistan and Iran have been so close on this should be enough of a demonstration that this is not a sectarian issue. I mean, Pakistan itself within has had a lot of trouble with some of these sectarian, or these what I think of as sort of peripheral problems, divides within the camp of, or within the religious tradition of Islam. These are peripheral divides. But this use of the term by some people, the Sunni alliance, is very misleading and dangerous. This is a regional security alliance.
100%, 100%. And I had on the channel yesterday another very, very notable commentator, Parveen Swani, and exactly the same take, exactly the same understanding that this is a regional alliance based upon the fact that countries in the region have come to the understanding that the United States is not a lumbering giant. The United States is a disgraced giant,
Mm.
is a defeated giant. I mean, very distinct difference between the two terms. Not previously, it was a lumbering giant, huge, big colossus. Maybe it can act, maybe it can throw a punch, maybe it will not, maybe blah blah blah. But now everybody sees, oh my God, this is not only a lumbering giant. This is a disgraced, defeated giant that is being kicked out, literally kicked out. Now, the bases have been more or less destroyed that were surrounding Tehran. Everybody knows that. Maybe three bases are semi-functional, only to the extent of allowing planes to land and take off. No defensive capability in terms of radars and everything else. Billions of dollars worth of equipment all damaged. Barracks all damaged. That doesn't allow the troops to even stay there. And everybody has seen that the United States has now moved back into Israel. All the equipment goes back to Israel in hangars deep underground to protect themselves from incoming missiles that are more and more accurate. So the U.S. has retreated into Israel. This is everybody who is an observer knows about it. And in the meantime, as we see in the coming months, there is this alliance that keeps growing with Islamabad, not Islam, Islamabad as the center of gravity, with Iran, if not a full member, at least, an honorary member, at least a, very astute observer. So the world then is witnessing the following. This is post World War II. This is what I was talking about. for the first time in the last 75, 80 years, the US retreats, no longer the superpower, one of three major powers, China and Russia, and Israel isolated, totally isolated. So how does that then impact the region, Vijay?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's got to be some serious soul searching happening in India, because a number of the Indian initiatives have been turned upside down. I mean, for instance, in recent memory, at the sidelines of the G20 a few years ago, India, great fanfare with the United States, inaugurated this India Middle East Europe corridor, where Indian trade or Indian goods were going to go from ports in Gujarat owned by Gautam Adani's company. They were to go to Dubai. From Dubai, they were to enter in Saudi territory. This is very important. Go up the length of Saudi Arabia into Israel, where from the port of Haifa, also owned by Gautam Adani's company, they were to go to Greece, uh, to two ports also owned by Gautam Adani's company. I used to joke that this is less a India, Middle East, Europe corridor and more an Adani corridor. But you see, this was a way to de facto normalize Saudi Israeli relations. And this Middle East corridor collapsed after the genocide against the Palestinians began in October 2023. This, as an idea, could not be put into place because Saudi Arabia would not at the time allow its territory to be used for goods transiting through Israel. It was a very sensitive moment. But now I don't think it's going to be possible for this India, Middle East, Europe corridor to be established with this new development. I think it'll be much harder for Saudi Arabia to allow the implementation of this corridor, which was in a way a hallmark of Indian West Asia policy. To run this corridor through. Secondly, I think India-Iran relations are going to have to go through some period of introspection and improvement. During this war, India didn't come off very well for Iran, and I think India has a major infrastructural investment in Iran at the Charbahar port, which India invested in, helped build. It was for Indian shipping to go to Charbahar and then Indian goods to go north from Iran into Afghanistan through Central Asia to Russia. That was the corridor for trade goods. Well, India didn't come off so great in this, and we'll see how India-Iran relations improve. So India is going to have to really manage and come up with a new strategy to engage with, for instance, the Mecca Agreement. Some of this, Zulfikar, is going to have to rely on some innovation from India regarding relations with Pakistan, because I think Pakistan has, in a sense, entered into this region, into its relations with Iran, now with Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Where does India go in this? It's going to appear as if India has no options in West Asia unless it cleans up relations with Pakistan. So, which is why I say Jaishankar, the Indian foreign minister or external affairs minister, is going to have to be very creative. I don't think, when the shooting ends and eventually there's a ceasefire between the US and Iran, and US begins to remove its bases from the Gulf Arab states, I don't think, things will go back to normal and India will be able to reinstate its Middle East corridor through Saudi Arabia and Israel, or that India will be able to reinstate operations through Charbahar. I think India is going to have to deal with Islamabad, and maybe this is the kind of key that you and I have been looking for improvement of relations between India and Pakistan. Maybe India will be forced to improve relations with Pakistan because India relies on oil from the Middle East. That's the bottom line. And maybe this Mecca agreement is going to actually strengthen the resolve of Saudi Arabia to say, look, you guys have to go and improve your relations. I mean, we can't be selling you oil. Iran says we can't be selling you oil unless you improve relations, because what Pakistan has done with its new relations with Iran and with the Mecca agreement with Saudi Arabia is in fact taken away from India two of its main suppliers of oil. Russia being another one. I mean, what options are left for India? So India is going to have to be creative. India, unlike the United States, cannot withdraw. Where is India going to withdraw to? It relies on oil from these countries. What is India to do? Buy oil from Nigeria and from Venezuela? Those are too expensive. It relies on the Middle East oil supply. It relies on Russia. You can't. And as Russian oil and piped natural gas increasingly goes to China, is pivoting away from Europe to China, the Europeans and the Indians are going to be in a common predicament. Europe as well is going to find it hard to source energy from the Middle East and from Russia. Where do they turn? Where will they go? Some of it is going to rely on how creative will the Mecca agreement be regarding Egypt and therefore Libya. How creative will they be? Will they bring these countries into this agreement? Thus far, again, nobody has been talking about North Africa in this. Yeah, Algeria, Libya, and Egypt. Where will they go in all of this? Because, in a sense, I will say the necessary outcome is the increasing isolation of Europe and India in this whole development. And so again, as an Indian, I will say that I think pressure will be there on the Indian leadership, on Jaishankar, who holds the key now. How will he work? Will he pull a Lavrov, a very clever foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, whose second language by third language, one of his top three languages after English and Russian, is Sinhala. He trained as a specialist on Sri Lanka, very creative man. What will Jaishankar do? Is a multilingual person, like his brother, professor at University of California, Los Angeles, one of the top historians of early modern India, Sanjay Subramaniam, brother of the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. Very intelligent people, but will they be creative? Will there be space in the far right government in India to open a dialogue with Pakistan? I mean, these are the unsettled questions of the moment, Zulfikar. Can't predict what's going to happen, but what is predictable is that this development of the Mecca agreement, I think, has created some problems for India's relationship to West Asia, Europe's relationship to West Asia. It's created some problems. A very clever maneuver, in a way, by Saudi Arabia, Pakistan to bring in Turkey. Very clever maneuver. It's created problems for Europe. Yeah, how does NATO deal with this development and so on? So these are things that you and I can't. We don't want to speculate. This is not a channel of speculation. I'm just laying out, I think, what I know to be a fact, which is there is some anxiety. Now, where the anxiety goes, we don't know. But, it can't be that it is impossible for India and Israel to have some kind of countervailing pact, because neither India nor Israel are energy rich, and therefore able to supply each other with energy. Yeah, India relies on the Middle East. Israel relies on now Colombian coal, South African coal, on energy from Turkey, stunningly. That's where it relies on its energy. It doesn't produce energy. It's trying to absorb natural gas fields that are claimed by Lebanon. It's trying to get access to that. There is a suggestion that there's a natural gas field off the coast of Gaza, that some of this genocide against the Palestinians is for energy off the coast of Gaza. All of this is in play. We don't know. Yeah, we're not speculating. We're putting things on the table.
Well, it takes somebody with extraordinary intellectual integrity to be able to do that, particularly with an Indian background. I mean, I too have an Indian background. I was born in Hyderabad, as I have said on this channel. But people like yourself and me, we would like to have the privilege of saying that we are actually global citizens and think about this in non secular terms. A final question for you, even though we could go on for another hour easily. Do you think that Shankar and Mr. Modi have the ability to divorce themselves even slightly from their, Hindutva ideology to be able to confront issues like you have just laid out?
Yeah, I mean, wow. This is a tough issue because, I mean, India is held down in a way by the emergence of Hindutva as the framework of this particular government, which has been in power now for over 10 years, for 12 years, a dozen years. This ideology really holds down, it prevents innovation at the highest level, in different fields. But I'm just thinking for a moment of diplomacy. It prevents innovation because, the Hindutva has a really toxic anti-Muslim streak in it, and that anti-Muslim streak is clarified, or it's realized in the world as anti-Pakistan. And so its anti-Pakistan view is so ingrained, that it would take a enormous amount of courage by the top leadership of the Bharatiya Janata Party, Mr. Modi leading the way. It would take an enormous amount of courage in that leadership to say, look, we're going to have to settle accounts with Pakistan. We can't settle accounts by an air war that failed. Can't settle accounts by a ground war. That would be absolutely ludicrous. Yeah, we have to settle accounts diplomatically, which means we got to come clean with Pakistan and say, look, the line of control is the border, and that's that. Do you agree? And do we agree Siachen is the high glacier is effectively demilitarized? And do we agree that Kashmir cannot be settled by us? We need superhumans to come and settle Kashmir, so we're going to have to leave it in a separate box, but agree that the rest of our border is the border, and that disputed territory of Kashmir we're going to have to deal with at some later date. I don't think either Pakistan or India have the appetite. To be honest with you, I don't think either side has the appetite to quote unquote settle the Kashmir matter. I just don't know how they would do it. I mean, does does Kashmir would Islamabad agree to an independent Kashmir? I don't think so. Would India agree to an independent Kashmir? I don't think so. So then what are we talking about? And I don't think either side has the curiosity, to sit down and open their minds to possibilities. I don't think they're curious about what are the alternative options. I think they're sitting in a mentality that is basically overrun by the facts. The mentality that both sides have is no longer available. India is not going to be able to take control of Mirpur and so-called Azad Kashmir, and Pakistan is not going to be able to take control of Srinagar and Jammu and what. This is just not going to happen. Yeah, but they have a mentality because they just don't have the openness and lack of curiosity about other options. They are still sitting on a 1940s view of the dispute settlement mechanisms, which is just not there anymore. Yeah. So this lack of curiosity, this emotional closeness of both sides means the Kashmiris are put into abeyance. They are held hostage to a mentality that is no longer applicable. And I don't know. You and I should perhaps do a whole hour one day talking
Yes.
about this frozenness both in Islamabad and in Delhi, this frozen attitude towards Kashmir, which doesn't open itself to the possibilities. There are lots of possibilities, for the question of Kashmir. There are lots of possibilities. I mean, if Punjab can remain divided, yeah, I think Kashmir could probably remain divided, just to be practical about matters. I mean, Punjabis are unhappy about the division, but it's divided. I mean, my family roots go back to Kartarpur and to Lahore, but the fact of the matter is they sit in Pakistan today. And why we need to have an agreement is so that people like myself can go and visit Kartarpur, where my great grandfather was the Guru Sahib. That's what I would like to do. It would give me a great joy. And it was only Imran Khan, by the way, who opened the door and said, we open a corridor for people to go and worship at Kartarpur, second most important site of Sikhism. It was Imran Khan who opened the door and said, and I think conversely, people in Pakistan would very much like to come and visit places in Punjab, in Uttar Pradesh, in Bombay, in Hyderabad, in a whole range of places around. The possibilities of mutual journeys back and forth, of families looking for places where they come from. I mean, it is so important for us as desis to recognize where we come from, and the fact that you can't go to your pind, you can't go to your
Yes,
village, is an extraordinary burden carried by millions of people, hundreds of millions of people over generations. And
trauma.
I think that
It's trauma.
emotional lack of that lack of imagination in Islamabad and Delhi is holding us back. Maybe we should do an hour, Zulfikar.
Yes, it is a generational trauma, Vijay, and actually I've had conversations with several intellectual giants on this issue, that this is generational trauma. And I mean, from my perch, I would like to say to our audience that I'm able to say to them that at the present time, the present government in Pakistan, which is actually led by Asim Munir, there is no question about that. Uh,
Mm,
they are very serious about settling this issue. They are very, very serious about coming to the kind of arrangement that you have been speaking of. And the evidence of that is that they have made all these strides all across their neighborhood, where things today are entirely different than they were even 3 years ago. And of course, great credit of that goes to Imran Khan, because actually these are his policies
mm.
that are now being implemented. Vijay, I can go on for another hour, maybe 2 hours. I deeply appreciate and greatly honored that you are here, lending your voice. I admire everything that you do. You are an intellectual giant, as I was saying to you before we started this show, and we are so blessed to have the privilege of listening to you express without any corporate overlay on anything that you say, so that people can understand exactly what is going on, with an unbiased view, with integrity that is so refreshing. So thank you so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you again, and hopefully we will do another show just dedicated to the India-Pakistan question, which is vexing. To our audience, if you like what we do, please hit the subscribe button, the like button. Go to our Substack channel, same name. Become a paid member. It supports us, $5 a month, less than the cost of coffee, and you will have twice a week these conversations delivered to your inside mailbox. So thank you very much, and we shall see you again with Vijay exactly the same time next week. Vijay, do you want to say anything in closing?
Well, I want to say I'm really happy to be with you, and chatting with you about these things is one of the highlights of my week. So thanks a lot for including me.
You are a founding member of this channel, Vijay. Without you, we will
Yes.
not be here. Thank you so
Well,
much. Bye
thanks a
bye.
lot. Bye.
I'm going to hit the stop button.